Okay, what's going on? Lit Applications. This is Coach Smith, and today we're doing some different things for fluency than we've done in the past. You guys are still reading The Outsiders, and so you can finish chapter 6 today and do the quick write that I've attached. But for fluency, this is our passage. So what I'm going to do is read this passage to you guys like I normally do. And then each day we're going to focus on a different set of words that have been highlighted so we can better understand the passage. Some of these words you may have heard before. You may know the definition to, you may not. And then some of these words you may have heard before, but you've never understood how or when they're used. So we're going to talk about that. A lot of these are words that are in place of other words you may use and just kind of expanding our vocabulary. So we're going to talk about how that happens as we go up in grade level, how we see a variety of words that are used to mean the same thing. And if we can understand what synonyms are, and we can look at their context, we can kind of know what that word really is saying without knowing the word fully or hearing it very often. So without further ado, I'm going to read. And so one thing that I want you to pay attention to is we are lining these out line by line. And a lot of times you'll see numbers here so you can follow the number of words in each line. The reality is I want you to realize that while you're reading, when you read in a book, you read line by line, we're actually reading to punctuation marks. So you need to be able to move from one line to the other flawlessly without pausing. And I think this emphasizes that they're in lines to help you develop that. But I don't want you to be reading like this. Snow has the same origin as rain. It comes from vapor in the atmosphere, especially from vapor rising from the surface of the sea. When the sudden cooling off takes place in clouds at a high elevation. So there's no punctuation at the end of these lines. And we need to get to where we are reading passages without pausing at the end of the lines. We can pick up the passage from the other side of the page. So we got to train our eyes to be able to do that without pausing there because there's no punctuation to pause. So correct reading will look like this. Snow has the same origin as rain. It comes from vapor in the atmosphere, especially from vapor rising from the surface of the sea. When a sudden cooling off takes place in clouds at high elevation, the condensation of vapor is immediately followed by freezing, which turns water into ice. I have already told you that cirrus clouds, which are the highest of all clouds and hence more exposed to cold than others, are composed of extremely fine needles of ice. Lower clouds, too, if subjected to a sufficient degree of cold, undergo the same transformation. Then there follows a symmetrical grouping of adjacent needles in delicate six-pointed stars, which, in greater or less numbers, and heaped together at random, make a snowflake. Soon afterward, when it has grown too heavy to float in the air, the flake falls to the ground. Examine attentively one that has just fallen on the dark background of your sleeve or in your cap. You will see a mass of beautiful little starry crystals so graceful in form, so delicate structure, that the most skillful fingers could never hope to make anything like them. These exquisite formations, which put to shame our poor human artistry, have nevertheless sprung from the haphazard mingling of cloud masses. Such then is the nature of snow, the schoolboy's favorite plaything. From a somber and silent sky it falls softly, almost perpendicularly. The eye follows it in its fall. Above, in the gray depths, it looks like the confused whirling of a swarm of white insects. Below, it resembles a shower of down, each flake turning round and round and reaching the ground only after considerable hesitation. If the snowfall continues thus for a little while, everything will be hidden under a sheet of dazzling whiteness. Okay, so now it's your turn to read. We're reading for accuracy on our first day, so we're trying to make sure we read each word, right? And some of these words are big and long and thick, and it's okay if we don't hit accuracy first day, but we want to read for accuracy. So your speed might pick up, but we don't ever want to read so fast that we lose meaning, right? Because there's clear meaning and there's a lot of figurative language actually in this text, if you've noticed that. There's also a lot of informative language, like science words. So your task, like any other fluency, is to read, and we don't have partners, so you're going to read to yourself. And then in the future this week, instead of having partners to read to, we may do Flipgrid readings or some form of recorded readings just so you can hear yourself and then listen and then read again. So I'm just going to encourage you to do that practice. I want you to hear yourself read and listen to the changes. A lot of times in our class, we're letting other people do that for us, and we may not really be seeing our growth or may not be having growth because we're not taking ownership of our own listening to our own reading. So language. So we have different words in here highlighted. And so there are 3 different colors. And I want to start with the green words. This is what we call academic language. So I don't know if you noticed, but you probably could read these words and you could think of subjects that you take that are not reading or English where you see these words. And people are always asking teachers, why are we learning this? Well, actually, here we are reading a passage about something. And although we may not be experts on science or math, understanding what these words mean help us understand the passage. And without that knowledge, we're going to struggle to know what this passage is really saying. And that's going to affect what we learn or can understand when people are talking to us or when we see a movie or a song or when we read or, whatever we have to do for our job, but also even some things we do for pleasure. If we don't have the skills we learn in school to understand certain words, we're going to struggle to really understand what people are telling us and know whether that's important or not, what they're really saying. So the first 3 words that are in green up here are atmosphere, condensation, and freezing. And if you've been in my science class or any of the science classes here, you've learned these words, actually. Atmosphere probably in 6th grade, but in our 7th grade science, we've talked about condensation and freezing, and we're talking about snow. So it's a scientific process. And so there is a science part of a lot of things that we observe in life, and understanding how science works helps us to know how this happens, not just what happens. And so a lot of this passage is explaining what happens and how cool and neat it is. There's a lot of figurative language about that, but there's also a lot of what we call like informative text that actually tells us how snow falls from the sky. So where does it start? It starts in the atmosphere, which is the air in our environment, or we call a biosphere. And so the atmosphere is all the clouds, everything that you breathe, all the way out to outer space. That's the atmosphere of the Earth, right? And so snow begins in the air, in the atmosphere, and it may begin at high elevations or low elevations. You'll see that in the passage. Second word, condensation. So means to come together. Co is a prefix that we've actually learned. So this is a science word that is talking about how, this is case water, but how liquids come together from a gas and form a liquid. And so when gas becomes a liquid, it condenses. We call that condensation. And so it goes from a gas, the atmosphere is air, condensation of vapor, which is a gas. So vapor, I'm assuming you know what vapor means. And then it's followed by freezing, which is probably of those 3 words, the one you know the most because you've learned it a long time ago. So basically we have a process, and we're using scientific words to understand it. As snow is water in the air, atmosphere, that condenses to form what would be rain. That's what we start out with. And freezes to form snow. And then here in the middle, we see some words that you may know, you may not know, you may be learning this year. but they're mathematical terms, and they're describing relationships. And so sometimes these mathematical words that you learn, if you understand the concepts in math, I know a lot of it's numbers, but the relationships are also used in a lot of writing to describe relationships between people, places, things, or in this case, molecules. So the word symmetrical, so metric in there, measure, so measurement, and symmetry, a synonym, something that is similar. You hear it that way, but uh, that's going to be the same. So we have the same measurement on both sides. That's symmetrical. So like a snowflake has a center, and then it's going to be symmetrical design out from that center point. Or like my face has symmetry. You can draw a line down the middle, and for the most part, there's an ear on each side. There's eyes on each side. There's two nostrils on each side. There's a beard. There's some imperfections here and there. But symmetry is that same sides, two same sides. And then adjacent is a geometry word, and that means next to. So you think about add or together, kind of, but adjacent means next to. So these needles are symmetrical from the center point, and they're next to each other as they go around, like a snowflake. You've seen a snowflake before, hopefully, at least a drawing of one, or the idea. So that's what they're saying when they're describing the snowflake, is it's symmetrical, and it has these adjacent needles going in different directions that are lined up next to each other. Right? And then down here at the bottom is perpendicularly. And so if you know what perpendicular is, right? You have in geometry, you have parallel, which are lines that are never going to touch, and you have lines that are perpendicular, which means they touch at a 90-degree angle. And so if this is saying perpendicularly, it's saying that the snow falls almost directly to the ground, like straight down, not at an angle. Of course, a lot of our snow fell at an angle, or it was super light and fluffy this week. And so you might not be able to say that about our snow. But lots of times, if it's heavy snow or wet snow, it will fall perpendicularly. So we have 6 words there. They're what we call academic language. And these are words you learn in some of your other classes, but here they are showing up in a passage, and we need to understand what they mean to really get what this passage is talking about. So in this passage, this right here, that is a huge part of just that paragraph describing the process of snow forming: gas, water, solid. And then this right here, these words are describing snowflakes and what they look like. So geometry, so shape. And then this perpendicular is describing the behavior of the snow, how it falls. So those are words for today in green. Those are academic words. So atmosphere, condensation, freezing, symmetrical, adjacent, and perpendicularly. So this would be an adverb, right? It's describing that it's falling with perpendicularness. It's not a word, but it's falling perpendicularly with that trait. And so a lot of adverbs, when you see that ly, you can think about it with whatever that word is saying in front of it, is a good way to describe how something is being done. That's how adverbs work. So good luck today. You're going to read this passage one time out loud on your own. And then obviously we're going to stick with that same passage throughout the week. And so hopefully by the end of the week, you'll be able to understand some new words, understand this passage, and what each paragraph is describing. Okay.